Hello and welcome to another episode of the Know Your Compliance, the KYC Podcast. I'm super excited today to have Zahra and Catagay from the ReallyTrusted team joining me to talk about eCARs or SRACs. That doesn't go as well, but the what might be the first phase of heading towards an examination. So before we get into it, let me give you guys each an opportunity to introduce yourselves. Zahra, who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm Zahra. I am the anti-money laundering operations here with ReallyTrusted. I have experience in like the fintech, bank, credit union realm, now real estate, and then soon to be mortgage broker. And yeah, I just am excited to talk about this because we've seen an uptick in it. So that is me. Chatai,
Cool.
what about you?
Well, yes, I'm the program lead for the FinTRAC Express program. So basically, all our friends out there who've already had their face-to-face meetings with me know that I create your compliance programs and ensure that your FinTRAC obligations are put in place, etc. And hence, I'm always here to help a lending hand for you guys.
Awesome. Thank you. So the Supervisory Risk Assessment Questionnaire, SRAC, or the eCARs, which actually, does anybody remember what eCAR stands for? Electronic something.
Compliance Assessment Report.
Thank you, sir. All right. Or eCAR, depending on what you get. They're essentially the same thing, first of all, those two sets of abbreviations. But Chatai, can you give me like a Cole's notes on what that is? Let's start there.
Yeah, exactly. So as you know, FinTRAC is the regulatory body for all AML CFT issues in the country, and hence everybody needs to abide by those rules and regulations. And what the eCAR is actually is a tool for FinTRAC to ensure that the regulatory entities are complying with these regulations. So as the name suggests, they're electronic questionnaires. And FinTRAC, once they forward these and request them to be filled out, has the opportunity to ensure they are able to assess the effectiveness of a regulated entity's compliance program, and also try to understand whether they can identify any potential risk in terms of money laundering or terrorism financing.
Yeah, and I think the lens that I would look at the eCAR slash SR, let's call it an eCAR because it flows off the tongue easily for today. The lens that I would take these electronic things from is that much like your FinTRAC compliance program should be risk-based, this FinTRAC uses a risk-based approach as to when and where to do further examinations. And I think the way I would look at it, this is their first filter that they might apply is to decide whether to go deeper or not with your business, with your reporting entity. So as you start to see this questionnaire, Zahra, what would be like some really high level, broad things that I think would be important for a compliance officer reporting entity to start to consider?
I mean, just with regards to what they would see, something that they would see in the eCAR?
Yeah, maybe actually, you're right. Maybe we should start by describing the questions and the layout of questions that they're going to get. Let's go with that first. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, just as a basic, they generally use Canada Post for information sharing, just with regards to just some of the recent hacks we've seen. So it's not a bad thing that they're choosing to do that kind of thing. But anyway, so it would be through Canada Post, and so if you get an email or something like that, don't worry, it's not out of ordinary. But then the type of information that they would be asking for basically is just
Sorry, before you go into this, by Canada Post, you mean the electronic Canada Post, not the to your door Canada Post. But carry on, sorry.
Yes, absolutely. It is not by paper. It is for sure eCAR electronic. Yeah, thank you for confirming that. So it would be kind of like either a PDF document or an Excel, and they would be asking you about your business, just your organization in general, specific to how your business practices are, like what types of I don't know, transactions that you accept, agents, very, very basic questions that you would be able to actually answer just based on what you know about your business. And then the other types of scenarios, and then there's also a part of it which asks about your compliance program. These are all questions that are based off of the 5 pillars that they actually give as guidance for the real estate entities and brokerages to be able to comply to FinTRAC. So they're going to be asking various questions about what type of transactions you accept, who you do business with, geographic risks, various things. But these questions are going to be ones that will generally be in your policies and procedures, if that's something that you have in place already. And so depending on where your compliance program is, these types of questions could be very, very easy. And then on the opposite side, they could also be slightly challenging depending on where you're at with your compliance program.
So a couple of thoughts that come out of that, I think. As you're completing this, I think to kind of go further into something you just said, everything that's in here should be written in your compliance program. It should be in there. Like, I just think that if you have a good set of program policy, procedures, risk assessment, the answers to, so the operational answers to your questions might not be in there, but the policy side of the questions should be in there. And you should be able to point to where in your documentation these are. And as a best practice, my tip on this would be that that's exactly what you would do. Now, as you're doing that, what are the things that we've seen people really struggling with? Either of you guys have feedback on where people have struggled with the SR, with the eCAR questions?
Well, I've seen in the questionnaire that basically, of course, it is basically pulled down many on, answering whether the various scenarios that they have asked for have happened or seldomly happened or never happened. So those are pulled down menus. So in that regard, I don't think there is any issue for anybody to answer them. But perhaps more difficulties may come up in regards to the compliance program questions itself. Hence, they need to have a good understanding of exactly, as just duly pointed out, what the compliance program is actually covering. And in that regards, you have all sorts of things like the payment methods accepted, your business, and etc., your sanction controls, etc., your reporting requirements, etc., you're doing this, you're doing that. I think FinTRAC here is basically trying to understand, do you have a grasp on your policies and procedures, or it's just a pretty document that's sitting at your brokerage on your desk kind of thing?
Yeah.
So it's basically, you need to have a good grasp on this. You need to understand what these legislative requirements entail, and hence, then it's just go with the flow in regards to answering these questions.
Go ahead.
And I think I was also just to tail onto that. The other part that I think some people have challenges with is if they feel that their compliance program isn't well rounded off, and so even if they're trying to answer these questions, they don't know how to, and it's only just because they might not have policies and procedures in place, or they might not have gone through a risk assessment, or whatever the instance is. And in those instances, that can become a little bit difficult. But yeah, so it's good. FinTRAC is doing their due diligence to figure out what stage they're at, really.
I actually just thought of something as we've been talking this through that I think is interesting. If we think about a formal examination, that process starts with a call, right? The FinTRAC phones the compliance officer, says, "Hey, we are beginning an examination of your business. You'll be receiving a letter detailing what we need to see. You have 30 days to respond, et cetera, et cetera." The interesting thing is that this is not a formal examination. And where the opportunity is if you are looking through this and you realize you have a deficiency, FinTRAC has a process for that. You have what's called a voluntary disclosure of non-compliance. There's a C at the end of that. No, that's right. Voluntary disclosure of non-compliance, VDNOC process, where you can self-disclose that you have some sort of a deficiency. I think the opportunity when you use these eCARs properly, if you're feeling like you have a deficiency, this might be what causes you to realize you have a deficiency, which be the greatest get out of jail free card, by the way, when done properly. How's that for an opportunity out of what might be an initially scary process? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're pointing at a appropriate thing here. It's a good approach. But on the other hand, this shouldn't be, as you mentioned, the get out of jail free card thing. I think it shouldn't be just an easy way out, nevertheless.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah, because eventually the legislative requirements are important, etc. And FinTRAC is, I think, when they first make this contact and they want the eCAR questionnaire to be filled out, they want to ensure that the business does understand its risks, what it's doing to mitigate those risks, etc. And hence, all the answers properly compiled in that questionnaire are reflecting upon the knowledge awareness of such legislative requirements. So I've never come at an instance where this voluntary disclosure, etc., has happened, at least in my past experience, etc. And hence, what the consequence would be for the business eventually when FinTRAC receives such a thing. Exactly. But nevertheless, it's beneficial, of course, because you'll be honest, and that's what's most important
Yes.
about these questionnaires as well. You have to be honest. There should be no faking any answers. There should be no amending or fraudulent replies, things like that. Whatever it is. I mean, as you point out, Greg, if you feel like there's deficiency in your program, state it. Don't go and say I have this, I have that, because FinTRAC, if they come in and then they find out that you actually don't have it, then you're in trouble.
Then you're in real trouble. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk? You want to?
Yeah. This actually reminds me of. Are you guys familiar with the Panopticon? I feel like I talk about it often. I think it was Adam Smith, but it's basically just this idea of a jail that had been created a long time ago that's fully circular, where there's only, say, one guard just at the top watching, and the rest of the jail people are in their cells and they're in a circle. And basically the idea is that there's only one person that's actually looking. They're not able to look at everybody at the same time at all. But because of the idea or the threat that there's somebody that could possibly be looking, whatever you're doing at the time, you are self-governing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really lends to this, because it's that idea that's kind of what FinTRAC is doing. I mean, they're sending these eCARs and they're saying, okay, this is our kind of spot check. If we have a bunch of people that come out and voluntarily disclose that they're out of compliance, it's actually really good, because
that'd be a win. Yeah, totally.
That would be such a win, because they're now seeing, okay, great, you're actually basically auditing yourself. You're seeing that you're able to see those gaps and you're going to be able to fix them. It doesn't mean that they're not going to look away from you. It just means that you're doing the work for them.
Well, but to be clear, like if they decide that if you submit this, there's kind of three possibilities as I see it. Look, we can all agree, probably everybody watching this, but certainly the three of us can all agree that the best thing would be that you have a program, a policy, a procedure, a risk assessment that's actually doing all the right things. That would be the perfect situation. The real world is such that that's not always true. And to be clear, like there's always room for improvement, no matter how great your program is. That's why effectiveness reviews are a part of the regime. That's why these are living, breathing documents. That's why the training needs to amend itself. That's why the regulations change. So like even the best case, it is possible for you to identify some deficiencies at some point. In fact, you should be occasionally. But let's go to the other possibilities. There's a possibility where you're trying, but as a result of receiving this eCAR, you realize that there's some questions that you just don't even know how you're going to answer. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to suggest to you that you have two options here. One, you commit fraud. And I would never think that that's the right approach. And I would hope that that's never the approach that anybody would take. Or two, you use a mechanism that FinTRAC has specifically set out for this exact situation where you realize you have a piece of noncompliance. You disclose that. Through that channel, there's an email address, there's a process. I think it's an actual email address, in fact, at this point. But anyhow, you disclose that process through that process, and then as you file your eCAR, you would go and say, look, we've filed a VDoc on this. We are going to work towards remediation of this. And in all of the interactions I've had with FinTRAC, that would be almost as good, if not better, honestly, than just being buttoned up in the first place, because now you're showing that commitment to compliance. The third possibility is And probably the worst of them, I think, is you go and you fill out the SRAQ and you're deceptive or misleading or kind of just ignore some of the questions or don't answer them in enough detail. And then FinTRAC's going to want more information. And then they come in and they find some deficiencies. Now you kind of put yourself into this hole all of a sudden. So I think the opportunity to use this as a free effectiveness review, for lack of a better way of describing it, is a pretty decent one. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree. I think people, rightfully so, because the amounts that are the fines that are given out are terrifying. But I think maybe people also don't have the perspective that FinTRAC really, like, they're just trying to get people into compliance. And so if they're seeing that you have that intention, if they're seeing that you want to do that, generally they're actually going to be relatively your friends. Like, it's not, it's kind of like a tutor relationship where they're only going to scold you if you are cheating on the test, you know what I mean? But if they're seeing you're really trying hard to figure out that math equation, they absolutely will say, okay, great, that's awesome, you get a C plus, but next test that you have, let's work on it from there on. And I think that's something that maybe a lot of people don't have that perspective on, because the fines are absolutely, yeah, they're terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of money. I like, yeah, it's a lot of, period, full stop. Like,
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and then why shell out all that money when you can just do your homework, basically? I mean, yeah, you can invest that money into your own business or whatever. I mean, it's simple. I mean, and as you duly point out, Greg, I mean, if you are not able to do this by yourself, just seek assistance, seek help, and I'm not sure whether we're allowed to advertise here, but
it's our podcast. We can do whatever we want.
Really trusted, guys.
No, it's our podcast, and I think it's totally fair to say, look, guys, like, if you're listening to this and you've received an eCAR and you're not sure how to respond, it's not too late. Reach out. We can help. We will happily walk you through. We've done this before. We can walk you through what we think are some of the better practices in terms of responses. And if your program is completely missing everything, this is a really good wake-up call for you. Because if you're receiving the eCAR and you don't want to commit fraud, which I'm going to assume is the case for most people, then your best bet is to start to resolve this problem. And we're going to help you with all of that. So that's...
Yeah. And if you are a client and you're listening to this, that is also awesome, because we would have access to your compliance program. We would be able to, we've been helping shape it. And so we would be able to actually give you direct feedback on kind of guidance with this specifically. So for sure, reach out whether you're a client or you're not.
Please don't go it alone.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you very much, Catagay and Zahra, both for your time. I appreciate you coming on, talking about eCARs, SRAQs, and whatever other 4-letter acronyms FinTRAC comes up with in the next iteration.
Sorry, should we, Greg, just quickly touch on what happens after, or once we send it? Is there, or is that a completely different? It's possible it could be a completely different podcast.
No, I mean, we could talk about that for sure. Like, go ahead. That sounds good.
Well, yeah, I mean, so just once you're done filling out the eCAR, usually you get a time frame to fill it out, and so you send that back, and we've seen where literally that's it. It just goes into the ether of FinTRAC and you never hear back, and that is likely the best case scenario, because that means that they're really happy with your responses, and maybe not even really happy. It's just that there aren't enough red flags for them to say, okay, we need to look at your compliance program, which is awesome. So if you don't hear back, that's great, but then it's possible that, I don't know timeline wise, it really depends. FinTRAC is kind of a little bit, they kind of have a curtain there, but if you do hear back, then there's a next step, and still there are a couple other steps before they decide to formally actually audit you, but it's just a continuance of gathering of information.
Yeah, I think, thanks for bringing us back to that, because I think it is important to realize that this is one of many things that FinTRAC is doing to monitor their reporting entities, and this is just information gathering for them. So you may not hear back. That's not unusual for FinTRAC. That's not a bad thing. might be a preferred option, honestly.
And perhaps one final note on the time frame for actually submitting your responses. I think I've come to understand that FinTRAC are quite, lenient in providing extensions to all those, who receive these questionnaires. So normally you're given 30 days to provide the feedback, but if you, for one reason or another, you have a pretty good excuse of, not being able to, you can apply to them and they will provide you an extension as well.
The key to that, of course, is don't ignore them. Ask for the extension.
No. Definitely.
If you go to them 2 months later and say, oh, by the way, we want an extension, they're going to say, wait a minute, this was due a while ago.
and ensure you're checking out your email inbox here and then, because sometimes they may just get lost between all the other things.
That's a good point, and a real life story that we can kind of touch on, which is that their contact information isn't perfect. So, if you've had an email address out there that make sure you're checking those ones that you set up years ago when you first set up your business, because if that's where the eCAR goes, that might be where the eCAR goes. So,
but then even to that, right? If there's a legitimate justified reason for why you never got that because you don't use it at all, FinTRAC, they're not extremely unreasonable. They're not. They're somewhat reasonable,
No, they're absolutely. If you if you didn't get it and you say, "Look, guys, we didn't get it, but we'll have it to you within 30 days of now," they'll say, "Okay, well, that makes sense. You just got it. Like you got 30 days." I mean, I can't guarantee that because they get to do what they want to do, but that's what we've seen, and that's what I would expect to continue to be the case.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you once again. Really appreciate you guys taking the time. And thank you for listening, folks, to another episode of the KYC Podcast, the Know Your Compliance Podcast. Please join us again soon. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Know Your Compliance Podcast. If you'd like more information about our guests, have a story idea, or want to be a guest, please reach out to hello@kycpodcast.com. If you want to discuss your anti-money laundering compliance needs with a member of the Really Trusted team, go to www.reallytrusted.com/consult.